Before we begin, if you enjoy drifting through history like this, consider following the channel and leaving a like. It helps these quiet journeys continue. Now, gently close your eyes, let the weight of the day soften, and imagine yourself far away in another time. You are a plague doctor in the medieval world. The air is cold, the streets are silent, and something unseen moves through the city. If you are ready, we can begin. The night does not arrive all at once. It settles slowly, like a thin veil drawn across the sky, dimming the last traces of warmth that once lingered in the narrow streets. You walk beneath it, your steps measured, unhurried, as though time itself has loosened its grip on you. There is a quiet to this place now, not the peaceful quiet of rest, but something deeper, heavier, a silence that seems to listen. Your breath moves softly behind the mask. It has weight, this mask, more than leather and glass. It rests against your face like a second presence, separating you from the world you move through. The scent of dried herbs fills the narrow space within it. Lavender, rosemary, something bitter you no longer try to name. It was meant to protect you, or perhaps only to comfort you. You are no longer certain which. The street bends slightly ahead, disappearing into a darker corridor between leaning stone walls. You have walked this path before, many times, yet tonight it feels different. Or perhaps you do. A distant bell echoes through the air. It rings once, then again. Slow, deliberate. You do not need to count the tolls. You already know what it means. Someone else has been lost. Your hand tightens slightly around the satchel you carry. Inside, glass vials touch softly with each step, a quiet rhythm beneath the distant bell. Remedies, mixtures, notes written in careful ink. All the things that once felt like answers. Now they feel like questions. You continue walking, and as you do, your mind drifts, as it often does in these long, quiet hours, backwards, to a time before the mask. Before the silence, before the weight of knowing. You remember your father's study. It was always warmer than the rest of the house, though you never quite understood why. Perhaps it was the fire that rarely went out, or the way the windows were kept closed, sealing the air inside. Or perhaps it was simply his presence. He spent most of his time there, bent over books, always books, thick volumes with worn edges, their pages filled with symbols and diagrams that meant nothing to you then. You would stand quietly in the doorway sometimes, watching him as he turned each page with careful precision, as though the answers he sought might vanish if handled too roughly. He rarely noticed you at first, and when he did, it was not with surprise, but with expectation. "You should not stand idle," he would say without looking up. His voice was never harsh, but it left no room for disobedience. You would step inside, the wooden floor creaking faintly beneath your weight, and move closer to the table. The scent of ink and dried plants filled the air, sharper than anything you would later come to know. "Read this," he would say, sliding a page toward you. You did not always understand the words. In truth, you understood very little, but you read anyway, because that was what he asked. And in those moments, you believed that if you read well enough, carefully enough, you might earn something unspoken. Something that hovered just beyond reach. Approval, or perhaps something softer. But it never quite came. Instead, there were corrections. Again, slower. You are not paying attention. You learned quickly that effort was not enough. Only precision mattered. And so you became precise. Outside, other children ran through the streets. You could hear them sometimes from the window. Their laughter carried easily through the narrow alleys, rising and falling like something alive. You would pause, just for a moment, your eyes drifting toward the sound. Your father never looked up. "The world beyond these walls offers very little," he once said. It was not a warning. It was a certainty. And you believed him. At least you tried to. The first time you saw a patient, you were not ready, though you thought you were. You had read the books, memorized the symptoms, studied the diagrams of the human body, each line and curve drawn with careful intention. You believed, in some quiet corner of your mind, that knowledge would prepare you. It did not. The man was older than your father. He sat slumped in a wooden chair, his breathing uneven, his hands trembling slightly where they rested against his knees. There was a smell in the room, faint but unmistakable. Not rot, not yet, but something close. You hesitated in the doorway. Your father did not. He moved forward with steady steps, his expression unchanged, as though this moment were no different from any other. "Observe," he said. "That was all." So you did. You watched as he examined the man, his hands deliberate, his voice calm as he asked quiet questions. You listened to the responses, fragmented and weak, barely held together by breath. You told yourself to remember everything, every detail, because this was what you had been preparing for. This was what you were meant to become. And yet, something felt wrong. Not in your father's actions, but in the space between them, a distance, as though the man before you was not entirely present, as though he were already beginning to fade. Later, when you stepped outside, the air felt colder than before. You took a breath, then another, trying to steady something you could not quite name. Your father joined you a moment later. "You hesitated," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes," you replied. There was no use denying it. He studied you then, his gaze steady, measuring. "Hesitation leads to error," he said, "and error leads to loss." You nodded, because you understood, or at least you believed you did. Years passed, not quickly, but steadily, each day folding into the next, marked by study, observation, and the quiet repetition of routine. You learned to read more fluently, to understand the language of the body, the subtle signs that others might overlook. You learned to remain still, to remain calm, even when something inside you shifted. Your father grew older, though he would never have admitted it. There were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when his hand would linger too long on a page, or when his breath would catch slightly as he stood. You noticed these things. You always noticed, but you never spoke of them, because he did not. The day everything changed did not feel different at first. The sky was the same pale gray. The streets carried the same quiet rhythm. Even the air held that familiar stillness you had come to know so well. But there was something beneath it, something subtle. Tension. You felt it before you understood it. And by the time you did, it was already too late. You returned to the present with the sound of your own footsteps. The street has narrowed. The walls rise higher on either side, blocking what little light remains. A single lantern flickers ahead, its glow weak but persistent, casting long, uneven shadows across the ground. You move toward it, slowly. Your hand rests briefly against the mask, adjusting its position. A habit now more than a necessity. There was a time when you would have found it suffocating. Now, it feels almost natural, like a boundary you no longer question. A door stands slightly open to your left. You pause, just for a moment. The darkness beyond it feels deeper than the night outside. No sound escapes from within. No movement. No sign of life. And yet, you know why you are here. You always do. Your hand lifts. The wood is cold beneath your fingers. You push the door open, gently, so gently that it barely makes a sound. And as the darkness inside begins to take shape, you step forward. The darkness inside the room does not greet you. It simply exists, thick, unmoving, as though it has been waiting. You pause just beyond the doorway, allowing your eyes to adjust, though you already sense what lies within. The faint outline of a bed emerges first, then the uneven shape of a figure resting upon it. A single candle burns somewhere deeper in the room, its light trembling slightly, as if uncertain of its own strength. You step closer. Your boots make almost no sound against the worn wooden floor. There is someone else here. You notice them in the corner, A woman seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She does not look at you immediately. Her gaze remains fixed on the figure in the bed, as though looking away might cause something irreversible to happen. When she finally does turn toward you, her eyes are hollow with waiting. "You came," she whispers. Not relief, not quite. Something quieter than that. You nod, though the motion is small, nearly hidden beneath the shadow of your mask. You have learned that words are not always necessary, and sometimes they are not welcome. The figure on the bed shifts slightly, a shallow movement, barely there. You approach slowly, your hand already reaching into your satchel. The familiar shapes greet your touch: glass, cloth, paper, tools of a practice that once felt certain. You kneel beside the bed. The air here is heavier, warmer. Your gaze settles on the patient. Their skin is pale beneath the dim light, stretched too thin across the bones of the face. Their breathing is uneven, each inhale shallow, each exhale slightly delayed, as though the body must be reminded to continue. You have seen this before, too many times, and yet each time feels like the first moment of understanding. Each time something inside you pauses, just briefly. "Can you help him?" the woman asks. Her voice trembles, but she keeps it contained, as if even her fear must remain quiet. You do not answer immediately, not because you do not hear her, but because you are listening to something else. The rhythm of breath, the silence between each rise and fall, the subtle signs that reveal more than words ever could. Your fingers move gently, resting against the patient's wrist. A pulse, faint, irregular. You close your eyes for a moment, not in prayer, but in memory, because somewhere long ago you learned what this meant. Your father's voice returns to you, clear, measured. "Listen carefully," he had said, guiding your hand to a patient's wrist much like this one. The body speaks long before it fails. You must learn its language. You had nodded then, eager to understand, eager to prove that you could. But even now, you are not certain you ever truly learned. You open your eyes. The room returns. The candle flickers again, casting a brief, wavering shadow across the walls. You reach into your satchel and withdraw a small vial. The liquid inside catches the light, faintly golden, its surface trembling with your movement. It is something you have used before, something you were taught to trust, though trust has become a complicated thing. You prepare the dose carefully, your hands steady despite the quiet weight pressing against your thoughts. Every motion is deliberate, every detail observed. The woman watches you. She does not move. She does not speak again. Hope, you have learned, often takes the shape of silence. When you finish, you lean back slightly. There is nothing more to do. At least, nothing that will change what has already begun. You remain there for a moment longer, your gaze lingering on the patient's face. There is a stillness settling in, subtle but unmistakable. You recognize it now. You always do. "I will return in the morning," you say quietly. The words feel familiar, too familiar. The woman nods, though you can see that she understands more than she lets herself believe. People often do. You stand. The room seems smaller now, or perhaps you have simply grown used to spaces that offer no escape. As you turn toward the door, the candle flickers once more, its flame bending sharply before steadying again. For a brief moment, you consider extinguishing it, but you do not. Some lights are not yours to take. Outside, the night feels colder, sharper. You draw in a slow breath through the mask, the scent of herbs filling the space once more. It is grounding, in a way, a reminder of something tangible in a world that often feels uncertain. You begin to walk again. The streets stretch before you, empty and quiet, but not still, never still. Your mind drifts again. It always does after moments like this, not by choice, but by habit, back to a time when uncertainty first began to take shape. The illness did not arrive with certainty. Not at first. It began as whispers, fragments of conversation carried through open windows and narrow streets. Stories of distant towns where something had gone wrong, where people had fallen ill in ways that did not follow the patterns you had studied. You remember the first time you heard it clearly. A man had come to your father's study, his voice low, urgent. You stood just beyond the door, as you often did, listening without being seen. "They say it spreads through the air," the man said, "or through touch. No one agrees." Your father did not respond immediately. You imagined him standing still, his expression unchanged, weighing the words. "Fear spreads faster than any illness," he replied at last. It was a simple answer, too simple. Even then you felt it, but the whispers did not fade. They grew, slowly at first, then all at once. More patients began to arrive. Not just one or two, but many. Their symptoms were inconsistent, unpredictable. Some recovered. Most did not. Your father worked longer hours, spoke less. The study grew quieter, though the work within it became more intense. Books were left open, notes scattered across the table, new remedies tested and abandoned in rapid succession. You tried to keep up, tried to understand, but something was changing. Not just in the world outside, but in him. The first time he hesitated, you noticed. Of course you did. He stood beside a patient, his hand hovering just above their skin, as though uncertain where to begin. It lasted only a moment, a brief pause that anyone else might have missed. But you did not, because hesitation, he had once told you, leads to error, and error leads to loss. That night, you found him alone in the study. He did not notice you at first. He was seated at the table, his posture slightly bent, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. The fire had burned low, its light dim and uneven. You stepped closer, carefully. "Father," you said. He did not respond. Not immediately. When he finally did look at you, something in his expression had shifted. Not drastically, not enough to name, but enough to feel. "There are things we do not yet understand," he said quietly. It was the first time you had ever heard uncertainty in his voice. You did not know it then, but that moment would remain with you, long after everything else had changed. The sound of your footsteps returns you to the present once more. You have reached another street, wider this time, more open, but just as empty. A cart stands abandoned near the center, one wheel slightly tilted, as though it had been left in haste. You pass it without slowing, your gaze fixed ahead. There is always another door, another room, another quiet space where someone waits. You wonder, not for the first time, when waiting became the only thing left. The bell rings again in the distance. You do not turn toward it. You do not need to. Instead, you continue forward, because that is what you have learned to do, even when the path leads somewhere you already understand. And as the night stretches on, you follow it. You walk for some time without thinking about where your feet are taking you. The streets begin to blur into one another. Stone, shadow, narrow passages that seem to repeat themselves. It no longer matters if you recognize them. The city has become something else now. Less a place, more a pattern. A rhythm of doors, of silence, of waiting. The wind shifts slightly. You feel it against the edge of your cloak. A subtle movement that carries with it something faint, something you have come to recognize without wanting to. Smoke. Not the warm, familiar kind that rises from hearths and kitchens. This is thinner, colder. It drifts through the streets like a memory that refuses to settle. You follow it without meaning to. The square opens before you slowly, the buildings pulling back just enough to reveal a wider space beneath the dim sky. The lanterns here burn lower, their light stretched thin across the ground. And at the center, a fire, small but steady. Its glow flickers against the surrounding stone, casting long shadows that move in slow, uneven patterns. There is no one gathered around it now. No voices, no movement, only the quiet persistence of flame. You stop at the edge of the square. Your gaze rests on it for a moment longer than you expect, because you remember there was a time when fire meant warmth, when it meant gathering, voices rising and falling in easy conversation, laughter carried gently through the air. You can almost hear it now, faint and distant, like something half forgotten. But that was before the city learned to keep its distance from itself. You move again, slower now, circling the edge of the square. The fire crackles softly as you pass, the sound delicate, almost careful, as though it too is aware of the silence surrounding it. You do not approach it. You no longer seek warmth in places like this. Your mind drifts once more, not backward in a single motion, but gradually, like a thread being pulled from somewhere deep within. The illness had a shape eventually, not one you could see, but one you could recognize. Patterns began to emerge beneath the chaos. Certain signs repeated themselves. Certain symptoms appeared together again and again until they formed something close to understanding. You studied them relentlessly. You wrote notes late into the night, your hand aching, your eyes strained from the dim light of the candle. You compared cases, searched for connections, for anything that might suggest a path forward. Your father did the same. Though he said little now, his silence had changed. It was no longer the quiet of focus. It had become something heavier. "Knowledge is not enough," he said one evening. You remember it clearly, the way his voice sounded. Not distant, not distracted, but grounded in something you had never heard from him before. You looked up from your work. "What do you mean?" you asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood and moved toward the window, his gaze settling on the darkened street beyond. "There are limits," he said at last, "to what we can understand, to what we can change." The words lingered in the air, uncomfortable, unfamiliar. You felt something tighten in your chest. "But if we study more," you began, "it is not a matter of effort." He turned then, his eyes meeting yours, and for the first time, you saw something you could not reconcile. Not weakness, but acceptance. You did not agree with him. Not then. You could not, because to accept limits felt too close to surrender. And you had been taught from the very beginning that surrender was not an option. So you worked harder. You read more. You pushed yourself beyond the quiet boundaries of exhaustion, convinced that somewhere, within the pages, within the patterns, you would find the answer he no longer believed in. And for a time, felt like you were close. There was a patient. You remember them clearly, young, stronger than most who had come before. Their symptoms had progressed more slowly, their body resisting in ways you had not seen often. You observed carefully, noting every change, every small shift that might reveal something useful. You adjusted the treatment, slightly, carefully, based on everything you had learned. And for a moment, it worked. Their breathing steadied, their fever lessened. The signs that had once seemed inevitable began to fade. You felt it then, that quiet surge of something you had been chasing for so long. Not pride, not exactly, but something close. Validation, proof that the effort had meaning. You went to your father that night. You told him everything, every detail, every change. You expected something, perhaps approval, perhaps even a rare acknowledgement. But he only listened, silently, and you asked when you finished. He did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the table, his fingers resting lightly against its surface. "And what?" he said. You hesitated. "They are improving," you said. "The treatment is working." He nodded once, a small, measured motion. "Yes," he said, "nothing more." It was not the response you wanted, but you told yourself it did not matter, because the result spoke for itself. Because this was what you had been working toward. The next morning, you returned to the patient. They were gone. You remember the stillness of the room, the way the air seemed to press inward, as though even space itself had withdrawn. You stood there for a long time, longer than you should have, your mind searching for something to hold on to, a mistake, a miscalculation, anything that might explain what had happened. Your father found you there. He did not ask what you were thinking. He did not need to. "You see now," he said quietly. You did not respond, because there was nothing left to say. The memory fades slowly, like the last embers of a fire, but it does not disappear. It never does. You return to the present once more. The square is behind you now. The fire's glow reduced to a faint shimmer at the edge of your vision before it disappears entirely. The streets narrow again. The silence deepens. You notice something ahead. Movement. Subtle. A figure standing near a doorway, half hidden in shadow. You slow your steps, not out of caution, but recognition. They do not move as you approach. Do not step forward. Do not call out. They simply wait. When you are close enough, you see their face. Young. Too young. Their eyes meet yours, searching for something you cannot provide. "My mother," they say softly. The words are simple, but they carry everything. You nod, because you understand, because you always do. They step aside, allowing you to pass. The door behind them creaks slightly as it opens further, revealing another dim interior. Another quiet space where time has slowed to something fragile. You pause briefly at the threshold, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. Each door leads to the same place now. Different faces, different names, but the same quiet truth waiting beneath it all. You step inside, once again, and the night continues around you, unbroken, unending. The room is smaller than the last. You notice it immediately. The walls feel closer, the ceiling lower, as though the space itself has drawn inward over time. A single window sits half covered by a thin cloth, allowing only the faintest suggestion of moonlight to pass through. It is enough. It always is. The mother lies on a narrow bed near the far wall. Her breathing reaches you before anything else. Soft, uneven, like something trying not to be heard. You move closer, aware of the young figure lingering behind you near the door. They do not step forward. They remain where they are, as though crossing the room might somehow make this more real. You understand that feeling, more than you would like. You set your satchel down gently. The familiar ritual begins again. Hands steady, movements precise, a quiet repetition learned over years that now seem both distant and impossibly close. You examine her carefully. Her skin is warm, too warm. Her pulse flickers beneath your fingers, quick but fragile, like a flame caught in uncertain air. There are signs, clear ones. You do not need to name them. You have learned that naming changes nothing. "Will she be all right?" the voice behind you asks. You pause, just briefly. The question is never new, but it never becomes easier. You do not turn immediately. Instead, you focus on the simple act of preparing something from your satchel. A measured motion, a familiar distraction. Because the truth does not arrive in words. It arrives in silence. "I will do what I can," you say at last. It is the answer you have given many times, and each time it feels slightly different, less certain, more distant. You hear a small shift behind you. Not disappointment, not yet. Something more fragile than that. Hope still holding its shape. You finish your work slowly, deliberately, as though the care you place into each movement might somehow extend beyond the moment itself. You adjust the cloth beneath her head, reposition her slightly to ease the strain of her breathing. Small things, quiet things, but sometimes they are all that remain. When you stand, the room feels even smaller than before. You finally turn. The young figure watches you closely, searching your expression for something, anything that might offer certainty. But your face is hidden, and perhaps that is a kindness. Stay with her, you say gently. They nod, quickly, as if the instruction itself provides something to hold on to. You collect your satchel, move toward the door, and pause only once more at the threshold, not to look back, but to listen. Her breathing continues, soft, uneven, still there. For now, you step outside, and the night receives you once more. The air has grown colder, or perhaps you have simply begun to notice it more. Your body moves forward, guided less by thought now and more by something deeper, something instinctive, shaped by repetition and necessity. Step after step, door after door, moment after moment. You no longer count them. You stopped counting some time ago, when numbers began to lose their meaning. Your mind drifts again, not sharply, not all at once, but gradually as it always does, pulled backward by something unresolved. Your father did not fall ill suddenly, not in the way others did. There was no single moment that marked the beginning, no clear sign that something had changed. At first, it was only small things. A cough that lingered longer than it should, pause between movements, a slight hesitation before standing. You noticed them, of course you did, but you said nothing, because he said nothing. Continue your work, he would say, even on the days when his voice carried a strain you had never heard before. I am fine. The words were familiar, too familiar. You had heard them from others, from patients who wanted to believe them, from families who needed them to be true. But hearing them from him was different. You began to watch more closely, not openly, never openly, but in the quiet spaces between tasks, in the moments when he believed himself unobserved. You saw the way his hand would rest longer on the table before pushing himself upright, the way his breath would shorten just slightly after climbing the stairs, the way his gaze would linger not on the work but somewhere beyond it. And still, he continued. One evening, you found him seated in the study once more. The fire burned low, its light uneven, casting shadows that moved slowly along the walls. He was not reading. The book lay open before him, untouched. You stepped closer, carefully. "Father," you said. He did not respond. First, when he finally looked up, there was something in his expression you had never seen before. Not uncertainty, not quite. Something quieter, more final. "You should rest," you said. The words felt unfamiliar in your own voice, reversed, as though the roles you had known for so long were beginning to shift. He gave a faint smile, small, almost unnoticeable. "You have learned well," he said. "It was not what you expected, not what you wanted. There is still more," you replied. "There are treatments we have not tried, methods we—" He raised a hand, gently, not to silence you, but to slow you. "There will always be more," he said. "That is not the same as there being enough." You felt it then, that same tightening in your chest, the same resistance, because accepting his words meant accepting something else, something you were not ready to face. "I can help you," you said, and this time your voice did not feel steady. He looked at you for a long moment, not as a teacher, not as something to be measured or corrected, but simply as you. "You already have," he said. "The memory lingers there, unfinished, unresolved, because what followed is not something your mind returns to easily. The street before you shifts slightly as you walk. A turn, a narrowing, the city folding in on itself once more. You realize after a moment that you have stopped, not consciously, not with intention, but your steps have slowed, then ceased entirely. There is a building before you, familiar, though you have not stood before it in some time. The door is closed, the windows dark, no light escapes from within. You do not move closer, not yet. because you know this place and what it holds. The night remains still around you, as though waiting, and for the first time in many hours, you hesitate, not because you do not know what lies beyond the door, but because you do. Your hand lifts slightly, then stops, suspended in the quiet space between action and memory. And in that stillness, the past begins to rise again. Your hand does not reach the door. Not yet. It lingers in the air for a moment longer, suspended between what is and what was. The wood before you is unchanged, aged, worn at the edges, marked by time in ways that feel almost deliberate. You have stood here before, not like this, not with the weight you carry now. The silence presses in, different from the silence of the streets. This one feels personal, as though it remembers you. You lower your hand, slowly, not in refusal, but in recognition, because you already know that what waits beyond this door is not something that can be approached lightly. Not even now, not even after everything. Instead, you stand there, breathing softly behind the mask, listening, and as you do, the memory comes, not gently, not gradually, but whole. It was morning. You remember that clearly. The light had come through the window in your father's study, pale and distant, stretching across the table where he sat. Dust moved through it in slow, quiet patterns, untouched by the urgency that had once filled the room. You had entered without knocking. Something in you already knew. He was seated in the same chair, the same place where he had spent so many hours, bent over books, guiding your learning with measured precision. But now, he was still. First, you thought he was resting, that perhaps exhaustion had finally taken hold, forcing him into a moment of stillness he had long denied himself. You stepped closer, carefully, not wanting to disturb him. "Father," you said, softly. There was no response. You took another step, then another, each movement slower than the last, as though time itself had begun to stretch. Your hand reached out, not to wake him, but to confirm something you were not yet willing to understand. His skin was cold. The realization did not come all at once. Settled, slowly, like everything else in this life you had come to know. You stood there for a long time, longer than you could measure, your hand still resting lightly against his, as though the contact itself might change something, might reverse something, might return you to a moment before this one. But nothing changed. The room remained as it was. The light did not shift. The dust continued its quiet movement through the air. And your father remained still. There were no final words, no last instructions, no moment of clarity where everything he had tried to teach you came together in a single, meaningful truth. There was only silence. And in that silence, you understood something you had been resisting for a long time. There are things knowledge cannot prevent, things effort cannot undo, things no amount of preparation can soften. You withdrew your hand slowly, carefully, as though even that small movement required consideration. And for the first time, you did not know what to do. The memory fades, but not completely. It lingers at the edges of your thoughts, quieter now, but no less present. You return to the street, to the door before you, to the night that has not changed. Your hand lifts again. This time it does not stop. The wood is colder than you remember, or perhaps your memory has simply softened it. You push the door open. The hinges respond with a low, drawn-out sound, familiar, though you have not heard it in some time. The darkness inside is complete, deeper than the rooms you have entered tonight, untouched, unbroken. You step inside. The air is still, not heavy with illness, not altered by presence, just still. Your eyes adjust slowly. Shapes begin to form. The outline of the table, the chair, the shelves that once held the books you studied so carefully. Some remain, others are gone. You do not question where. You move further into the room, each step measured, not out of caution, but out of respect. This place is no longer part of your routine, no longer a space of work or learning. It is something else now. You reach the table. Your hand brushes against its surface, your fingers tracing the faint grooves left by years of use. You remember sitting here, reading, struggling to understand, hoping to be seen. Your gaze shifts to the chair. It is empty. Of course it is. And yet, something in you pauses there, as though expecting something different, as though memory itself might take form if you wait long enough. But it does not. You exhale slowly, the sound quiet behind the mask. There is nothing left here to guide you, no voice to correct you, no presence to measure your actions against. Only what remains within you. You turn slightly, your gaze falling to the corner of the room. A small stack of books rests there, untouched. You recognize them immediately. The same volumes your father once placed before you. The ones you struggled through. The ones you believed held answers. You kneel beside them. Your hand lifts one. The cover is worn. Familiar. You open it. The pages are unchanged. The words the same. Carefully written, precise, certain. And yet, they feel different now. Not because they have changed, but because you have. You close the book, gently, and return it to its place. For a moment you remain there, still, quiet. Then slowly, you rise. The room does not ask you to stay. It does not hold you, and you realize it never did. You move toward the door once more, not with hesitation, not with uncertainty, but with something else. Understanding, not complete, not perfect, but enough. Outside, the night remains, unchanged, endless, but something within you has shifted. Slightly, quietly, you begin to walk again, and for the first time in a long while, the path ahead does not feel like something you are simply following. It feels like something you are choosing. The door closes behind you with a softer sound than you expect. Not final, not heavy, just quiet. The street stretches out before you once more, familiar in its emptiness. The same narrow stones, the same dim lanterns struggling against the dark. And yet, something about it feels less distant now. Not warmer, but clearer. You begin to walk again. Your steps fall into rhythm without effort, guided by something steadier than before. The mask still rests against your face. The scent of herbs still lingers with every breath, but it no longer feels like something separating you from the world. Not entirely. A faint sound reaches you. Not the bell this time. Something else. Voices. Low. Careful. You follow them without thinking. They lead you through a narrow turn, then another, until the space opens slightly into a small courtyard you have passed many times before but never truly noticed. There are people here, a few, standing apart from one another, as though distance has become instinct rather than instruction. Their voices are hushed, their movements restrained, each gesture measured. At the center, a figure sits on the ground, wrapped in a thin cloak, alive, but fragile. No one approaches them, not out of indifference, but out of fear. You step forward. The quiet shifts slightly as you enter the space. Not with recognition, but with awareness. They see the mask. They always do. You kneel beside the figure. Slowly, deliberately. Their breathing is shallow, but not as weak as others you have seen tonight. Their hands tremble slightly, but there is still strength in the way they hold themselves. You study them, not searching for certainty, but for possibility. How long? You ask quietly. No one answers at first. Then a voice, hesitant, from somewhere behind you. Since this morning. You nod. A small motion. Your hands move again, reaching into your satchel, retrieving what you need. But this time, there is something different in the way you do it. Not urgency, not desperation, care. You prepare the mixture slowly, carefully, not because it will guarantee anything, but because the act itself still holds meaning. The figure watches you, their eyes steady, though tired. "You are not afraid?" they ask. The question catches in the air between you. You pause, just briefly, then quietly, "I am." It is the first time you have said it aloud. The figure studies you for a moment longer. Then slowly, they nod. You finish preparing the remedy and offer it to them. They take it with unsteady hands, their fingers brushing briefly against yours. The contact is small, fleeting, but it remains. You stay there for a while, not because you must, but because you choose to. The others in the courtyard begin to shift. Not closer, but not further away either. Something in the space has changed. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Time passes. You do not measure it. The figure's breathing steadies slightly. Only slightly, but enough to notice. You do not let yourself expect more than that. When you finally stand, the courtyard feels different than when you entered. Still quiet, still uncertain, but not entirely defined by fear. You gather your things, adjust the mask once more. "Stay near them," you say to the others. "Keep them warm." They nod, and this time, there is less distance in it. You step back, then turn. The streets await you again, but they no longer feel endless. As you walk, the sky begins to shift. Barely, a subtle lightening at its edges, too faint to call morning, but enough to suggest that the night is not permanent. You notice it. You always notice these things. The bell does not ring again. The silence remains, but it feels different now. Not empty, not watching, simply still. Your steps slow, not from hesitation, but from awareness. You have walked these streets for hours, through shadow, through memory, through moments you have carried for longer than you realized. And now, something within you has settled. Not resolved, not complete, but quieter. You understand now what your father could not fully say, what he tried to show you without words, that this work was never about certainty, never about control. It was about presence, about standing beside something you cannot change, and choosing not to turn away. The thought does not arrive suddenly. It unfolds, gently, like the morning that is beginning, slowly, at the edges of the sky. You stop once more, at the crest of a narrow street that overlooks the quiet city. The rooftops stretch out before you, uneven and silent, touched now by the faintest trace of light. You remove your hand from the satchel, let it rest at your side, and for a moment, you do nothing. You simply stand, breathing. The mask remains, the city remains, the work remains, but so do you, and that is enough. After a while, you begin to move again, not because you must, but because there is still more to be done. There are still doors, still rooms, still quiet spaces where someone waits. And now, you understand what it means to answer. The first light of morning begins to touch the stone beneath your feet. Soft, uncertain, but real. You walk into it. The light does not arrive all at once. It grows, slowly, carefully, as though it too understands the weight of this place. The sky softens from black to a muted gray, then something lighter still. The outlines of the city sharpen just enough to reveal what the night had hidden, but not enough to take away its quiet. You continue walking, not through darkness now, but through something in between. The streets are no longer entirely empty. A window opens somewhere above you, just slightly. You hear it before you see it, the faint scrape of wood, the hesitation in the movement. Someone is awake, watching. You do not look up. You do not need to. The presence is enough. A door further ahead opens as well. Slowly, a figure steps out, pausing at the threshold, as though unsure whether the world beyond it has changed during the night. Perhaps it has. Perhaps it hasn't. They see you. Of course they do. The mask makes sure of that. For a moment, neither of you moves. Then, quietly, Almost instinctively, they lower their head. Not in fear, not entirely. Something softer than that. Recognition. You continue walking. The city begins to breathe again. Faint sounds return, distant footsteps, the creak of carts, the murmur of voices kept low but no longer absent. Life does not rush back in. It never does. It returns cautiously, as though unsure of its place. You pass a familiar street, the one with the narrow turn and the leaning wall where the stone curves inward. You remember it from earlier in the night, though it feels different now beneath the growing light. Less confined, less uncertain. You notice something on the ground. You almost miss it. A small object. Worn. Simple. You stop. Bend slightly. It is a piece of cloth. Folded once, then again. Left carefully near the edge of the wall. You recognize it. Not from memory, but from meaning. It is the kind of cloth used to mark a home. To signal. To say, without words, someone inside is unwell. You hold it for a moment. The fabric is light in your hand, almost weightless, and yet carries something familiar. You look toward the door beside it. Closed. Still. The morning has begun. Others will come. Other doctors. Other hands to knock, to enter, to continue what must be done. You could leave it. You should leave it. That would be the easier choice. The quieter one. Your hand lingers, and then you set it back down, carefully, exactly where you found it, not out of avoidance, but out of understanding, because this too is part of the work. Not every door is yours to open, not every moment yours to carry. You straighten, take a breath, and then you move on. The city unfolds around you with each step. Light touches the rooftops now, faint but steady. Shadows shorten, details emerge. The world, though still fragile, begins to take shape again. You pass the courtyard from earlier. You do not stop, but you glance just briefly. The figure you left there is still seated, still wrapped in the thin cloak. But they are not alone now. Someone sits beside them, closer than before, not touching, but near enough that the distance has softened. You do not interrupt. You continue walking. Your steps feel different now. Not lighter, but more certain. The mask still rests against your face. The scent of herbs remains unchanged. The weight of the satchel still pulls gently at your shoulder. Nothing external has shifted, and yet everything has. You think briefly of your father, not as he was at the end, not in stillness, but in motion. Standing beside a patient, hands steady, voice calm, not because he knew the outcome, but because he understood his place within it. You understand now, not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough.